Okay, this is the lecture for Lesson 8 on the vocabulary, and we'll also be discussing in vocabulary the cross-contour drawing. We'll be doing that in quite a lot of detail, as well as representational drawing, which is what's covered on these 2 pages. And then we have exercises that we'll discuss later on that are on these 2 facing pages here. So we're still dealing with the principles of composition, and what we have here on vocabulary, we have a couple words that we're already familiar with, and we'll start out with the ratio and proportion drawing. So what I'm going to do is just put another book on here, and you remember from lesson 6 we talked about ratio and proportion, which it measures the height to the width of an object or also any plane within the object. And we had some examples over here from that lesson where we talked about measuring the height of the object to the width, and we had a proportional measurement of whether it was a horizontal shape or a vertical shape. In this case, this one is slightly vertical but almost a square shape. Also, I guess we can talk about line drawings, and line drawings, these are line drawings, examples of them here. They're very simple, but line drawings are actually drawings that don't have any value in them. So it's a very simple description, but in the case of some of the drawings that you've done recently, especially with a lot of rectilinear shapes, those are really to learn about receding planes and trapezoids and parallelograms that you learned in the last lesson. And it's really more about drawing those shapes as lines only. So there is a lot of times when line drawings are used just for what they are, to describe things. The grid system, I've got another book here. I'll just bring this one over. And this was in lesson 7. And we talked about the X and Y axis. We'll be using this quite a bit throughout the semester, and how to line up those rectilinear shapes again. Also, the grid system can be used in another way to enlarge or reduce objects. You did some of that when you were working with your contour drawings that you enlarged for Project 2, although when we'll see in lesson 9, when we get into charcoal, we'll be working with enlargements in a little more detail using the grid system in a different way. Okay, but so there's different ways to use that grid system. We've used it a couple ways in the last lesson, and then we'll use them again in the future. Okay, now so we've covered some of the things like grid, system, line drawing, ratio, and proportion. Now the real crux of what we're doing today, we're going to talk about representational or realistic drawing, and then we'll work into cross-contour drawing. Okay, so I want to go back to lesson 7 here for a minute and talk about this drawing of mine from 2007. Now, the thing about composition, and what I did here was I wanted to show you that a composition is made up of, first of all, shapes. And what you learned in Project 2 was that we talked about repetition. And you'll notice how there's repetition in here of a lot of diagonal lines. And you'll also notice there's a repetition of circles. And I talked about size relationships in Project 2. And look how you have these circular objects, which are, you have 3 of them that are similar in size. You have smaller ones or medium-sized ones, and then you have quite a few very small ones. Now, realistic compositions are made up of the same elements and design elements that you're using in a non-objective way. But in realism, or representational drawing, they're used the same way. It's just that you're representing objects, and it's a little more difficult to orchestrate that, because sometimes a student gets kind of involved in the object you're drawing and not really in how to create a design for the picture plane. So if you look at this and you say, well, I see a lot of objects in there, but I really, once but you don't really see the shapes that I'm talking about. But when this drawing was built, it was built unconsciously for me, which is also something you'll do too, as you learn more about the principles of design that are part of drawing and painting and every other two-dimensional type of artwork that you might want to pursue. So we'll talk about now this drawing here, which is by Wanda Gog. And here's the full drawing, and then over here I have a close-up for you to look at in your book because it more clearly shows contour drawing. So I have a larger picture, and I'm just going to bring that into the frame here. So what I want to do is talk about how, first of all, the design principles that was used in this particular drawing. And actually this is called a lithograph, which is drawn with a grease pencil on limestone, which is a type of printing process that was invented in the early 19th century and is actually used up until the early part of the 20th century. So first of all, what I want to talk about repetitive shapes, just like I did on my drawing, and I'm going to just draw some of those in here for you. And as you look at this, and you can look at the one in your book, you'll see like what looks to you like a scene with a lot of cats and logs and a wood-burning stove and a door. And to you, it's like, well, maybe those could be anything, or they could be any shape, or they could be positioned any way that you want. And, as you learn to draw more, you'll learn, and build compositions, you'll learn how to orchestrate or arrange things in order to draw what you want to draw, but still use those basic elements. So let's talk about some curving elements first of all. And then these logs down here, I'm just going to outline these curves really quick. And some curves over here in this cat tail. And this curve here, there's now a cat, you could say has, you could draw a cat a lot of different ways, but if you want to draw a cat so it has the kind of curves so that you can do repeating shapes, then, that's a very subtle kind of suggestion that you'll learn about. And then there's shadows. I have a couple over here too. So if you notice all of the curvilinear shapes in here that she built into this. Now, the second thing, so first of all, you have shape repetition, and you have an organization of value as well, where you might want to have lighter values here, and you need to balance the darks and lights from left to right and top to bottom, just like you did in Project 2. And now cross contour adds a little more to that. If you look in your book closely, and you can look at this larger picture, you'll notice there's a lot of lines in here. This whole thing being a lithograph is made up using that grease pencil and just making a lot of little lines. So if I was to start sketching out the basic layout of these lines, I would say a lot of them on this back panel or this door are vertical lines to illustrate this is a flat shape. Now this stove is round, and all of the lines that are drawn in this stove are curved lines to emphasize that it's round. Now even though there's other shapes on here, that this door for instance, that's also drawn with these curved lines, and the curved lines are used to make the shadows. This box has lines going, horizontal lines in here. Actually, they aren't horizontal, they're kind of actually going up on an angle. And in here, this would be a very different drawing if these lines were all drawn in one direction. And it not only emphasizes the shape of the object, but it also, as you're going to see in a minute, controls the flow of the composition. And you're going to be practicing that today with the exercises. So I'm almost done here. All of these directional, I'm just following what this artist did for the major parts of what was done in this drawing. These lines were drawn in this direction, and you can take a look at those. Just look real close at the drawing in your workbook. They're emphasizing all of these round shapes, but they're all done in very specific ways. So now, if you look at this, you'll see quite a range here of a lot of elements. And now, the thing about the composition of this is that if you take a lot of these lines, I'm going to draw some arrows on here. You see how a lot of lines will, in my opinion, visually create large arrows, and then smaller things have smaller arrows. And what those arrows represent is your visual awareness and where your eye is going to go in an unconscious way in this composition, and it's all based on the direction using cross contour. And cross contour, again, is not to be confused with contour drawing, because this is actually based on the object itself. In other words, if the object is round, okay, contour drawing, the other kind of contour did not say cross contour in it. And so that really didn't go across the object, it just went around the outside of the object. So what you can see in here then, in representational drawing, is that cross contour drawing and some of the things that you already know about with repetition of shapes and size relationships all help to make a compositional drawing better. So we talked about all of these items except for thumbnail sketch. Now I'll just cover that right now and all the things that I talked about in here are all described right here, as well as, so you can just read along or reread this or watch the YouTube over again. The same thing when I talk about realistic drawing is all these things in here. Now, we already did some thumbnail sketches, and if you remember, those were on a grid system. Well, not a grid system, we had a layout. And you probably remember the layout. You had 4 of them on here, and they were 7 by 9. Now that's a pretty good size for a thumbnail sketch for you to work on. It's an arbitrary term. In other words, the thumbnail, meaning your thumb, you could actually make them as large or as small as you wanted to. The idea, though, that I find a little misleading is most students feel that it's a small drawing. It is not a small drawing. It is a drawing that, and the definition of a thumbnail sketch is that it is a rough drawing that is an idea sketch. And all you're trying to solve is a compositional arrangement with black and white and 1 or 2 values. For instance, if I was to put a line drawing in here of a box of some kind, and I used closure down here. My box is a little crooked, but that's all right. I don't care today. So if I wanted to make a composition and using 3 of these boxes of some kind, okay, so I'll put another one over here. And this is a line drawing, okay? So, and I'll put another one over here. I'll make a thin one. Okay, so I have, this isn't a very good one. I guess I need one more here because that way I want to put some closure up here at the top. So there. Now I closed off the top, I closed the bottom, I now have 2 negative spaces right here, back here. See, so this is a better drawing. And you say, well, I'd like to make it a little better than that. So I'm going to put one more in. I'll put another little box over here and make it look like that. There. Now I've closed it off and now I have 1, 2, 3 shapes. Okay, this is a line drawing. Now, if this was an idea sketch for a composition, the first thing I would do is say, where do I want my blacks and whites and so on? So a rough drawing like this, and I just put a background in, imaginary thing. And what I'm doing now is I'm going to put in a dark area, and I'm just illustrating now what a rough sketch or thumbnail sketch should look like and how long it should take. It shouldn't take very long. The next couple lessons, you're going to be doing this more. Now, again, don't confuse this with what you did when you did this layout, because that was contour drawing and you were trying to apply those to something else. These are a series of idea sketches, and you will be given a still life in the next lesson or 2, and that's when you'll be using this. And we'll be talking about this more later. But I just wanted to illustrate really quick to you what a thumbnail sketch might look like if it was a rough sketch. It's an idea sketch, and I'm just trying to figure out where my darks and lights are going to be and how it's going to go. But I'm probably already looking at something, say, and that's how you'll select different areas when you do something like that. In other words, if you have a composition or a still life out there,